Hey guys, this is Dave with Audio In, and this is Aful's fourth and most recent release, the Explorer. And it's also their least expensive release yet. And from what I understand, the concept is based on the idea of taking some of the driver technologies from the Magic 1 and then integrating it or combining it with some of the technologies from the P-Series IEMs. So that's pretty cool because all of those IEMs are pretty awesome, but ultimately, of course, all that matters in the end is whether or not it sounds good and is competitive within the market. And that's what I'm hoping to determine in this review. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. Included in the box are the IEMs and cable. They've also included a nice case and a pretty decent selection of ear tips. The price is $119, and the driver configuration they decided to go with this particular release is a 3-driver hybrid setup, and it consists of 1 dynamic driver and then 2 balanced armature drivers. And the drivers are housed in a 3D printed resin shell, a well-made and nicely designed resin shell, I might add, especially for this price point. It's light, it's small, I think it's roughly the same size as the Magic 1, and it's shaped nicely as well. It fits my ears perfectly. My guess is it'll probably fit most ears fine. I also like the gradient blue sparkle design on the faceplate. Actually, when you look a little closer, it kind of looks like stars against the night sky, and I could see how they wanted to tie the design in with the whole Explorer concept, and I think they did a really nice job with that. As far as the cable, this one has a 3.5 millimeter termination with 2-pin connectors at the earpieces. The quality is pretty decent. It is a budget cable, so I would expect it to feel maybe a little plasticky and maybe a little stiff, which it does. However, it looks nice, and I actually haven't had too many issues with tangling, so it's manageable enough as to not cause any issues really. And then lastly, the case they provided is pretty nice as well. It is a softer case, but it's still rigid enough to offer a reasonable amount of protection. Otherwise, it's pretty much in line with what you might expect at this price point. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the sound. So again, they've combined these 2 different ideas from their other IEMs. And if you remember, what made the Magic 1 kind of a standout IEM was how they took a single balanced armature driver, and using, I think, what was called their Nautilus acoustic structure, they managed to create an IEM that basically gave you a full frequency listening experience from sub bass all the way up to upper treble, and it was also tuned pretty well. So a 1 BA driver covered all of those frequencies. They also pulled some inspiration from the Performer series, and we all know how much I love both of those, the Performer 5 and the Performer 8, which those are hybrid IEMs. And if I remember correctly, I think the idea behind those was that Aful used some RCL frequency division technology and a very precise kind of 3D printed acoustic tube structure. And it has been a while since I reviewed both of those, so I don't remember exactly how that worked, but whatever they did, it worked really well because again, both of those IEMs held top spots in my rankings for quite some time and still do, but that was the inspiration behind the development of this IEM. So I guess the question is, did it work? Well, in my opinion, yes, because the tuning is pretty good. They took a similar approach as the Performer series with the tuning as far as the upper mids being a little more relaxed, similar to what you might see with the SA6 lineup or even similar to the Pilgrim. So you're not going to have the amount of vocal energy or forwardness that you might see or have with a more Harman style neutral tuning. It's going to be a little more laid back. And then in the lower half of the tuning, it's going to give you a little extra low mid and mid bass energy. So its overall presentation is basically going to be more laid back with some warmth and pretty natural sounding. But to break things down a little further, starting with the bass, again, this is a dynamic driver handling the bass frequencies, and it definitely has many of the good dynamic driver qualities that I like. It's maybe not the most controlled bass as far as the transition out of the bass into the mids, because I am hearing a little bit of bass bleed, which at this price point is kind of a nitpick because it's otherwise clean. And it does have good dynamics as well. It has good extension into the sub bass, which is really nice because those sub bass frequencies help. Again, they lay a nice foundation and help to support the rest of the bass frequencies. Now, coming out of the bass into the mids, again, there is some warmth in the low mids, which is nice in the sense that it gives richness and weightiness to male vocals and some instruments. However, it does also introduce, again, a little bit of bass bleed, which does affect the lower mid-range clarity a little bit. Again, that is a nitpick at this price, but what it does do very well is it presents vocals and instruments naturally. And while I would probably like to hear a little more in terms of that mid-range energy or the vocal energy, there is still enough vocal presence to keep the listener's attention and not get lost or buried in the mix. I just wished, again, I wish there was a little bit more energy in the pinna gain area. Now, that energy does start to pick up quite a bit as you move into the lower treble, and that also helps to give some instruments like guitars a little bit of edge and some energy to cymbal strikes, and it even helps with the stick attack on snares and toms. But what's really impressive about this set is that typically when you get into this budget realm, you can often run into problems with treble harshness, peakiness, or sibilance. So cymbal strikes can sound overly splashy, and something that really impressed me about this set was that this doesn't have any of those issues. The Explorer found a really good balance between having enough treble energy to make sure cymbals or any other instruments that land there maintain proper amounts of energy, but they never sound harsh or shrill. It always maintains control in those upper frequencies. And it also brings some nice detail and definition back into the picture as well. And even though I would still consider the overall treble presentation to be on the smoother side, it's not so smooth as to cause it to sound overly veiled or unfocused. Now, as far as the upper treble energy, it does start to drop off a little bit past 10K. So it is lacking just a little in terms of air and shimmer. It's there, but there are recordings that I'm very familiar with that I know should have just a little bit more there. So the Explorer isn't quite revealing or bringing out as much of that as I would prefer. And those upper treble frequencies can also be where a lot of the micro details live. And I did notice the Explorer struggling just a little bit to reveal that as well. That being said, for this price point, this is actually some of the better treble that I've heard, to be honest. And I have to reiterate, these are all very common limitations at this price point. So consider these nitpicks, because honestly, they really are. Rarely do you find sets under $100 that don't have at least a couple of these issues. That's why the Planar was so impressive. Its detail levels are unusual at this price point, but it also uses a Planar driver, and even it's not without its faults, because it suffers from some of the same issues that a lot of V-shaped tuned IEMs suffer from, like sucked out mids, which can cause it to sound a little bit unnatural. So even some of the better IEMs around this $100 price point are going to have their trade-offs. Now, in terms of the Explorer's technical performance, while I do feel it does have fairly decent imaging, its soundstage is a little on the intimate side. Not that IEMs have super wide soundstage to begin with, but as IEMs go, I would consider this one to be a little more narrow than average. But again, I do think it does a decent job with positional cues. It's not super focused, but definitely focused enough to be able to pick out where the instruments fall within the sound field. And again, as far as overall detail, it's about on par with other IEMs in this particular price range. It doesn't really fall behind, but it's not necessarily a standout either. So how does it stack up to the competition, and do I feel like the Explorer is a good value? Yes, I do feel like it's a very good value because there aren't many sets at this $100 price point that are going to give you this kind of tuning. And if you step back and look at this set as a whole, it gets a lot right and it avoids many of the common issues we discussed at this price point. So yes, the bass isn't super controlled and the mid-range energy is maybe a little south of my preference, but it's still some of the best bass at this price point right now, in my opinion. And it also has some of the most natural sounding mid-range that I've heard at this price point. And up to this point, my top 3 IEMs under $100 have been the Aria 2, EA500, and then my favorite under $100 is the Keyfine Delsey. And just to remind you, the Delsey's only $60, but now the Delsey has some pretty serious competition in the Explorer. And I would actually put the Explorer right there with the Delsey, both in terms of tuning and technical performance. But again, the Delsey is obviously still a better value. But if I'm only considering sound performance and taking my sound preference into consideration, these are my 2 favorite budget IEMs right now. And as far as the differences between the Delsey and the Explorer, I do prefer the overall upper mid tuning of the Delsey over the Explorer, but I prefer the bass presentation of the Explorer over the Delsey. So they both have their unique draws for me, which that's why it makes it difficult to put one before the other. But again, I do feel like the Delsey is still the better value out there right now. But as far as overall sound performance, again, I would put them side by side. And both of these, again, are my top 2 IEMs at the $100 price point right now. So that concludes my review of the Aful Explorer. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch. If you like my content, please take a minute and hit that subscribe button. Also, if you would please like this video, please share this video. I hope you guys have an awesome day.